Hello cruel world, my name is Dr. Sohom Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. It's an AMA, Ask Me Anything video. Getting 2,000 subs has kind of encouraged me to head further towards my goal, which is to start a cult. Which is to educate the masses about mental illness and about offending and the crossover between the two. If you are one of those 2,000 people that have subscribed, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to say thank you. If you've not subscribed, then from the bottom of my heart, I want to wish a plague of locusts upon me. So you asked me a bunch of questions, here are my answers, let's get started. Katie Stewart, most of the people you assess are men rather than women. Why do you think that is so? Yes, Katie, you're absolutely right. When it comes to mental illness, the incidence is roughly the same between men and women. It's slightly more for women, especially for some disorders like depression, and more women get some specific disorders like eating disorders. Although there are some issues related to mental health that are more prevalent in men, such as suicide. But roughly speaking, it's almost equal. However, when it comes to violence and offending, men are massively overrepresented. So to put that into context, right now in the UK, in prison, there are about 22 times as many men in prison than there are women. About 80,000 men in prison and less than 4,000 women in prison. I think there's a whole host of reasons for this. I think there's internal reasons, so men have more testosterone, which predisposes you to violence. And I think our kind of conceptualization of our role is different and is more leaning towards violence, such as protecting our family, having to stand up for ourselves in a violent manner. And there are external reasons that contribute to offending, like homelessness, joblessness, and drug use. So that very broadly, I think, explains some of the difference. Good question. Question number 2. Red Phantom, what was your very first case? First of all, Red Phantom, what are you, some sort of Marvel villain or something? My very first sort of psychiatric case would be my very first psychiatric job as a doctor, which was way back in 2003 in Edinburgh. I can't remember the very specific case, but most of the cases around them were for liaison psychiatry. So what we would do is we'd assess people that came in for a range of reasons, but the most common presentation by far was after a suicide attempt. There were more women than men, more young women than older people, and we would have to do a risk assessment. Ultimately, we had to decide whether it was safe to send them back home, which it was for the majority of people, or whether they needed to be sectioned to psychiatric hospital because they were a danger to themselves. In terms of my first medico-legal case, so my first criminal case, the first case I gave evidence, that was, I believe, 2012, by which time I'd specialised in forensic psychiatry, and it was a tragic case of an 18-year-old schoolgirl who became completely psychotic out of the blue, and she smothered and killed her toddler nephew. She didn't know what she was doing at the time. She had these paranoid, psychotic and grandiose beliefs. She thought she was ridding the baby from demons, and she thought that the baby could be reincarnated. So obviously, it goes without saying, this was an emotionally charged case. Aside from the emotions, it was fascinating for me because I got to give evidence at the Old Bailey, such as not guilty by reason of insanity, and I got her moved from prison where she was to hospital for long-term treatment, which is exactly what she needed at that time. Question number 3, from Valerie Cross. She actually had 3 questions. I'm going to read 2 of them. Do you find it hard to switch off? If a case is totally horrific or the patient is really in need, how do you not take that home? And then, do you still get the same kind or level of job satisfaction now compared to when you first started in psychiatry? First of all, Valerie, you asked 3 questions. That is a little bit greedy. I do not find it hard to switch off, and I don't take work home. And to be honest, I'm not fully sure why. I think I'm just very good at being able to emotionally disconnect from what happens during my day at work to what I do at home. I think it's part of my nature. I think I've got some psychopathic traits, to be absolutely blunt. Another big factor for me is that I'm so busy that I don't generally have time to stew on cases. I'm busy at work. As soon as I have one case finished, there's always 2 or 3 other ones lined up. And I'm busy in my life outside of work. For example, I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning just to make this YouTube video. I'm actually writing a book at the moment about my work, which will be out next spring. I have a family. I have a wife and two kids. I exercise every day. So because I keep so busy, I don't really have any downtime to think and stew upon some of the tragedies that I see in my day-to-day work. And even when I do that, I'm just able to not let it bother me because, as I say, I'm slightly psychopathic. In terms of the job satisfaction, I've got to be honest, I've never really thought about this, or not very deeply, but no, I don't think I do get the same level of job satisfaction. I think part of that is because the novelty of what I see has gone. So I've seen most common psychiatric diagnoses dozens, if not hundreds of times. It's quite rare where I get a case where clinically I don't know what's going on. It does happen, but it's not that common. So it's not quite as intellectually stimulating maybe as was when I first started psychiatry. And I have to say there's not a lot of positive patient feedback because of the clientele that I see. So when I worked in general adult psychiatry before I specialised, I would help a lot of people, and some of them would be happy and some of them would be sort of grateful and give you, positive feedback. In forensics, that very rarely happens because you see people who are extremely unwell, don't know they're unwell, don't have insight. I often have to medicate them against their will, often have to detain them in hospital against their will. So my measure of success is that we rehabilitate these people, and if we do well, we don't see them again because they're out in the community, they're not reoffending, they're not relapsing in their mental illness. So we never get to see them further down the line, or we rarely do, to get any kind of positive feedback. So I think that feeds into my job satisfaction. I still love it and I still find it very interesting, but I don't get that positive feedback very much. Such is the profession I have chosen. Question number 4 from Kerry Ellis. Do you think love is all we need? No offense, Kerry, but I ain't no hippie. I'm not entirely sure what that question means. If you're talking about forensic psychiatry, then no, I don't think love is all we need, because if somebody's got severe mental illness like a psychosis, if they're tortured with voices, love is not going to fix that. They need strong antipsychotic medication. They need years of therapy before they're going to be well enough to live in the outside world. That's not to say that love doesn't help, especially to support some of the patients that I get who come from a background of having very little support and love. So I think it's got its place, but it's not everything. And in terms of general life, I have to also say, no, I don't think love is all we need. I think we need stimulation, I think we need humour, I think we need discipline. Sometimes life has to be hard. I also think we need setbacks and challenges and disappointments so that we can kind of appreciate our success. I think if everything was perfect all the time, if everybody just loved each other all the time, I think life would be very boring and I would be out of a job. So the next question is from Samantha Brooks, and it is, do you ever feel emotionally attached to your patients, especially the ones with really traumatic backgrounds? So the answer to that, Samantha, is yes. I do feel emotions. I'm not a robot, but I'm also very good, I think, at separating myself from those emotions. I can demarcate what is my work, what I do during the day, versus what is my home life. Some patients definitely touch my heart more than others. As you say, people that come from traumatic backgrounds, so that teenager that I mentioned before was a very good example of that. I frequently see patients, prisoners, defendants who have horrific backgrounds of abuse, from sexual abuse to violence to poverty to being sort of brought up with parents who use drugs. So it's not that I don't feel it, it's just that I can break it away and carry on with my life. I'm just good at that, I don't know why. The next question is from Gert, who also asked 3 questions. I'm going to do 2 of them. How do you handle working with peeps who've done really awful things which repulse you? And what are examples of cases where it went well, badly, surprisingly? First of all, Gert, I like your name. You're not messing around. I love the efficiency. I'm guessing you're German. I don't know. As I said before, I'm able to demarcate my role. I'm able to demarcate my life from my work, but also within my work, I'm able to demarcate my role, which is to assess the psychiatric needs, from the role of the court, which is about justice. So I trust that the courts are punishing people when they need to be punished. My opinion is only about whether they need to go to hospital or prison, whether there's a psychiatric defence, and what kind of psychiatric treatment. So if I concentrate on only those things, then if I'm good at my job, which I think I am, then I should be able to separate the horrific nature of the crimes, whether that be anything from paedophilia or killing family members. These are things that I sometimes see. I try to think of it like a heart surgeon who was carrying out a heart bypass on a murderer, say, for example. So when they're doing their job, their actions, there's no reason for the background demographics and the nature of the patient's act to influence what the heart surgeon's doing. I try to think of it like that. Obviously, it's not quite like that because in psychiatry, there's a lot more getting to know the patients, a lot more personal, but that's how I try and conceptualize it. And so for the case examples, I can't really go into a lot of detail in this video about all these cases because otherwise the video would be like really long. But very briefly, in terms of cases that have gone well, there was that teenager that I've been talking about. So we managed to get her rehabilitated, treated a mental illness, got her reconnected with the family, took many years. And I think considering the position that she started off from when we saw her in prison, psychotic, having killed her nephew, to where she finished up years later, I think we, myself and the team that worked with her, did a good job. In terms of other cases that have gone well, there have been several times where I've met prisoners who become quietly psychotic. So they're not agitated, they're not shouting, they're not voicing paranoid delusions, but they're kind of festering in paranoia in their cells and have gone unnoticed by the mental health teams in prison for months, sometimes even longer, because the mental health teams are so busy. So I've helped manage to get those people out under section to hospital, which is where they need to be. In terms of cases that have gone badly, it doesn't happen very often, but once in a while, I will think that somebody either in prison or at court is really unwell and needs to go to hospital. I'll make a section recommendation, and then for whatever reason, the judge completely decides to ignore me. And ultimately, even though I can make suggestions, I don't have the legal authority if somebody is on remand or on bail for a crime. I can't pull them out of that situation. I have to have the judge's nod. So sometimes the judge just completely disagrees with what I say and either releases that person, which is obviously very dangerous, or sends them to prison, which can make that person deteriorate. So that's quite frustrating. In terms of other cases that have gone bad, one that just jumps out into my memory was a young man who had schizophrenia, who we'd rehabilitated over a long period of time. He eventually got leave. He used his leave appropriately for a few weeks. Then he went AWOL, so he ran away from the escorted nurses, went missing for about 3 days, went on this massive drugs binge, and when he came back, he was completely psychotic, really agitated. We had to put him in a seclusion room because he was a danger to other people. Even when he came out of seclusion after a few days, you could see that he was just distressed, agitated, really perplexed, confused. He was struggling to form any thoughts. And I think that incident in itself put him back, I would say, for several months, easily 6 months, maybe even longer, maybe 9 months, to get him back to the recovery position he was. Very frustrating to see. I felt really sorry for the guy. That is a case that went badly. Next question is the miseducation of Miss S. Is it true that men have greater success than women in committing suicide? If yes, what's your opinion as to why men are more likely to complete their suicide? Absolutely, that's correct. So suicide is the biggest killer of men under 45 in the UK. Around 15 per 100,000 men commit suicide, whereas it's about 3 times less for women, so it's about 5 per 100,000 commit suicide. Which is interesting because when you think about it, more women suffer from depression than men. What are the reasons? Like most things in psychiatry, I think it's complex and I think it's multifactorial. For a start, I think men don't communicate their emotions or their feelings as much as women, so they bottle it all up inside, and also they find it harder to ask for help. So men are much more likely to only ask for help right at the end of their deterioration journey when things have got really bad compared to women. Also, I think alcohol plays a big factor. So men are about twice more likely than women to be alcohol dependent or alcoholics. By the way, I've done a whole range of videos on alcohol and how it relates to mental health and how it relates to offending. Go check it out. So alcohol not only can contribute to depression, making it worse in the long term, but acutely when somebody's intoxicated, drunk, and if they've got suicidal thoughts, then it's a massive risk factor to push them over the edge to actually try and commit suicide. On top of all of that, I think there are different external factors and pressures on men. For example, men are more likely to feel that they need to support their family. They're more likely to suffer from homelessness, as I think I mentioned before, joblessness and drug abuse. So all of those things, I think, contribute to suicide. And finally, men generally use more fatal methods. So men are much more likely to hang themselves than women. Women are much more likely to take overdoses. The former is much more likely to lead to eventual death compared to the latter. Bit morbid, but I think it's an important topic to talk about. In fact, I'm very keen to make a video series on suicide. I will do that at one point. Final question, Lily May Leap. Should somebody go to a mental hospital if they think they will kill somebody, or will they go to jail or something like jail? So this question was in another one of my videos about patient confidentiality, but I like the question. I thought it was interesting, so I want to answer it here. So if somebody thinks they'll kill somebody, it depends on whether that's driven by mental illness. If they're hearing command hallucinations, so they're hearing voices, say, related to schizophrenia, or if they have paranoid delusions that other people, either specific people or people in general, want to hurt them and they feel compelled to lash out and kill somebody, then absolutely, they sound very high risk. They will probably need to go to hospital. They'll probably need to be sectioned against their will if they don't have insight that this is a mental illness. Another issue is the level of security that they need. And that also depends on the circumstance. So for example, if it's a big burly man who's got a history of violence, who's been stashing weapons or carrying weapons, then that's obviously very risky, so he's more likely to need a secure psychiatric unit, which is not a prison, but I suppose it's like a prison in many ways, in that there's gates, it's locked, there's a high level of security and observation. But the whole point of being there is for treatment, to release somebody, to make them safe, as opposed to punishment in prison. If somebody doesn't have a mental illness and they're just, say, making threats to kill, it also depends on the circumstances. So if it's like just out of anger, in the heat of the moment, if it's not a credible threat, then the police might investigate it briefly, but probably there'll be no consequences. There might be some sort of caution. However, if it's a credible threat, and crucially, if they intended for somebody else to fear it, then that is a criminal offence. And in the UK, you could spend up to 10 years in prison for doing that. There's lots of factors. So for example, if they were brandishing a weapon when they were threatening somebody, or if the credibility of their threat was high, so if they followed somebody home or they knew somebody's home address, these are all factors which would make it more likely that they would serve prison time or a longer sentence. Okay, so that's me rabbiting on enough. Those are the answers to your questions. Thank you for taking the time to ask them. If you've got other questions, then I think I'll do another one of these AMAs, maybe at 3,000 subs. Check out the rest of my channel. I dissect a whole range of issues related to mental health, mental illness, some related to offending and violence, some in relation to diagnoses that are more common to the average person. There's something for everybody on this channel. The channel has been growing. I would really appreciate your help if you could spread the love, tell all your friends and tell all your enemies about A Psych for Sore Minds. Until next time, stay euthymic, and please remember, I love you.